The 1980s marked the end of an era in British kitchens, the last decade when families still cooked meals their grandparents would recognise. Then came microwaves, ready meals, and a food revolution that swept away centuries of tradition. We're counting down 20 British meals that vanished after the 80s, dishes that disappeared so completely, most people under 40 have never even heard their names. 20. Prawn cocktail. In every British restaurant and dinner party of the 70s and early 80s, prawn cocktail reigned supreme. Pink prawns drowning in Marie Rose sauce served in glass bowls that screamed sophistication to a generation discovering international cuisine. The prawns sat in lettuce beds while the sauce, a mixture of mayonnaise, ketchup and Worcestershire, provided that distinctive pink colour that marked proper entertaining. Served with brown bread and butter, it represented British attempts at continental dining. Prawn cocktail embodied 80s aspiration, when families thought sophisticated meant fancy presentations of simple ingredients, before food became genuinely international. Little did families know that even their most cherished dinner party traditions were about to disappear forever. 19. Beef Wellington. The ultimate dinner party showstopper, beef Wellington demanded skills that British home cooks were rapidly forgetting. Tender beef wrapped in pâté and pastry, proving that ambition could still triumph over convenience. The beef required perfect searing before wrapping in mushroom duxelles and pâté, then encasing in pastry that had to remain crisp while the meat cooked to perfection. Getting everything right simultaneously required timing that bordered on artistry. Beef Wellington represented the peak of British home entertaining, when dinner parties mattered enough to justify spending entire days in preparation for one spectacular meal. But families were about to discover that spectacular meals couldn't survive in a world obsessed with speed. 18. Duck à l'orange. In 80s Britain, duck à l'orange arrived as the height of French sophistication, crispy-skinned duck glazed with orange sauce that made ordinary families feel like they were dining in continental restaurants. The duck skin crackled while the orange sauce provided sweet contrast to rich, gamey meat that required careful roasting to avoid greasiness. The presentation with orange segments and glossy sauce created restaurant-quality drama in suburban dining rooms. Duck à l'orange proved that British families were hungry for culinary adventure, willing to tackle challenging recipes that promised to transport them beyond traditional roasts. Yet the comforting weight of family tradition was about to be swept away by forces no one saw coming. 17. Steak Diane. Flambéed tableside with dramatic flair. Steak Diane brought restaurant theatre to British dining rooms. Thin steaks in brandy cream sauce that sizzled and flamed while families watched in fascination. The steaks cooked quickly in butter before brandy was added and dramatically ignited, creating flames that danced while the alcohol burned off. The resulting sauce, rich with cream and mushrooms, elevated simple steak into dinner party spectacle. Steak Diane represented British dining's theatrical phase, when presentation mattered as much as flavour and families craved experiences that felt special and sophisticated. Meanwhile, family dinner theatre was about to be replaced by something no one could have predicted. 16. Chicken Kiev. The ultimate 80s dinner party main course, chicken Kiev promised exotic sophistication. Breast stuffed with garlic butter that erupted in molten streams when properly executed. The chicken had to be pounded thin, wrapped around herb butter, then coated and fried until golden while keeping the butter molten inside. When cut, the butter should fountain out in aromatic streams that impressed guests and demonstrated culinary prowess. Chicken Kiev embodied British aspirations toward international cuisine, representing the era when foreign-sounding dishes could transform suburban dinner parties into sophisticated affairs. Simply put, authentic international cuisine was about to make these loving British interpretations seem quaint and outdated. 15. Coronation chicken. Created for Queen Elizabeth's coronation, this curry mayonnaise chicken salad dominated British buffets and sandwich fillings throughout the 70s and 80s, sweet, mild, and utterly unlike any curry that had come before or since. The chicken was poached and mixed with mayonnaise, curry powder, and apricots, creating something that tasted vaguely exotic without challenging conservative British palates. Served at weddings and buffets, it represented safe adventure for families afraid of authentic spice. Coronation chicken proved that British cuisine was trying to evolve, creating fusion dishes decades before fusion became fashionable, though the results were uniquely British in their cautious approach to foreign flavours. Yet families' cautious culinary adventures were about to be overwhelmed by a flood of authentic global flavours. 14. Cheese fondue. Nothing captured 80s sophistication quite like cheese fondue. Molten Gruyere and wine in special pots, with long forks for dipping bread cubes that turned dinner into interactive entertainment. The cheese melted with white wine and garlic, while diners gathered around the pot, spearing bread cubes and swirling them through the molten mixture. Losing your bread in the fondue carried playful penalties that turned eating into social gaming. Cheese fondue represented British families' embrace of European dining culture, transforming meals from sustenance into social experiences that prioritised interaction over individual consumption. Clearly, social family dining was evolving toward formats that would isolate rather than unite. 13. Beef stroganoff. Rich with sour cream and paprika, beef stroganoff brought Russian sophistication to British tables, tender beef strips and creamy sauce that made families feel worldly and cosmopolitan. The beef was quickly seared before simmering in sauce thick with mushrooms and sour cream, creating something rich enough to satisfy the heartiest appetites. Served over rice or noodles, it represented exotic comfort food that felt both foreign and familiar. Beef stroganoff proved that British families were ready for international flavours, willing to embrace dishes from distant cultures when they offered comfort alongside adventure. But the kind of adventure families craved was about to take on meanings they never imagined. 12. Black Forest Gâteau. The ultimate 80s dessert, Black Forest Gâteau towered with chocolate sponge, cherries and cream. A Germanic monument to excess that crowned every special celebration with kirsch-soaked indulgence. Layers of chocolate sponge were brushed with kirsch before being filled with whipped cream and cherries, then covered in more cream and chocolate shavings. The result was impressive enough to silence entire dinner parties with its dramatic presentation. Black Forest Gâteau represented British dessert ambitions at their peak, when families would spend hours creating elaborate confections that announced special occasions with Germanic precision and alcohol-laced sophistication. But the dedication required to create family masterpieces was disappearing faster than anyone realized. Speaking of dedication, if you're dedicated enough to watch this entire countdown, hit like and tell us which vanished meal you miss most. 11. Coq au vin. French rustic cooking arrived in British kitchens as coq au vin, chicken braised in red wine until tender, proving that British families could master continental techniques when the results promised sophistication. The chicken pieces browned before braising in wine with vegetables and herbs, slowly absorbing flavors that transformed simple poultry into something approaching restaurant quality. The wine reduced to create sauce rich enough to justify the hours of patient cooking. Coq au vin showed that British cooks were willing to embrace slow cooking when it promised to elevate their dining beyond traditional roasts and stews. Yet the patient, slow rhythm of family cooking was becoming impossible in the accelerating modern world. 10. Veal escalope. Tender, veal pounded thin and fried golden, veal escalope represented British dining's brief flirtation with continental sophistication, delicate meat that required skill and money in equal measure. The escalopes were hammered until tissue thin, then coated and fried until crispy outside while remaining tender within. Served with lemon and herbs, they provided elegance that felt genuinely European rather than British interpretations of foreign cuisine. Veal escalope embodied British aspirations toward authentic continental dining, representing the era when ethics hadn't yet complicated culinary choices, but moral complications were approaching that would change family cooking decisions forever. 9. Sole Veronique. The height of restaurant sophistication, Sole Veronique paired delicate fish with white grapes, a combination that seemed impossibly elegant to British families discovering fine dining. The sole fillets were poached gently while the sauce combined white wine, cream, and grapes that had been peeled individually. The result was subtle enough to showcase the fish while providing sweetness that felt sophisticated rather than cloying. Sole Veronique proved that British families were ready to embrace dishes that prioritized technique over substance, flavor over filling, sophistication over satisfaction. Tragically, the kind of sophistication families treasured was about to be redefined by forces beyond their control. 8. Tornados Rossini, the ultimate luxury dish. Tornados Rossini stacked beef medallions with foie gras and truffle, ingredients so expensive they transformed dinner into investment, cooking into financial risk. The beef tenderloin was seared perfectly while foie gras was warmed separately, then assembled with truffle sauce that cost more per ounce than most families spent on entire meals. The result was luxury concentrated into single mouthfuls. Tornados Rossini represented British dining's brief golden age, when families would bankrupt themselves for single meals that proved their sophistication to neighbours and themselves. Yet this golden age of family dining was ending across British society faster than anyone understood. 7. Lobster Thermidor. Nothing announced prosperity quite like lobster thermidor, shell-dwelling luxury mixed with cream and cheese, then grilled until golden in presentations that screamed expense. The lobster meat was extracted, mixed with rich sauce, then returned to shells and topped with cheese before grilling until bubbly. Each step required techniques that British families were learning from French cookbooks and television chefs. Lobster Thermidor embodied British families' determination to master restaurant cuisine at home, proving that ambition could overcome inexperience when the stakes were impressive enough. Nevertheless, the impressive family celebrations that justified such ambition were becoming unsustainable dreams. 6. Canard aux cerises. French-inspired duck with cherries represented British cooking's most ambitious phase, gamey meat balanced with fruit that promised sophistication for families willing to invest time and money. The duck slowly released its fat, while cherries provided sweet contrast to rich, dark meat that required patience to cook properly. The sauce balanced sweet and savoury in ways that felt genuinely continental, rather than British approximations. Canard aux cerises proved that British families could master authentic French techniques when motivation met opportunity, creating dishes that belonged in restaurants rather than suburban kitchens. And that was precisely the problem. Restaurant food was about to stay in restaurants. 5. Rack of lamb with mint sauce. British Sunday dining reached its peak with rack of lamb, perfectly pink meat crowned with herb crusts that announced prosperity while honouring tradition. The lamb required precise timing to achieve pink perfection, while the mint sauce provided traditional accompaniment that connected French presentation with British flavours. Each chop represented significant investment in single meals. Rack of lamb embodied British dining's golden moment, when families could afford restaurant-quality ingredients while possessing skills to prepare them properly at home. But both the affordability and the skills that made family feasts possible were disappearing simultaneously. 4. Beef bourguignon. The ultimate slow-cooked sophistication, beef bourguignon demanded hours of patient braising. Tough meat transformed into tender perfection through wine and time that modern life couldn't spare. The beef was browned carefully before hours of wine braising with vegetables that slowly melded into sauce rich enough to justify the investment of time and expensive ingredients. Each serving represented commitment to cooking as craft, rather than convenience. Beef bourguignon proved that British families understood fine cooking when they possessed time to practice it, creating dishes that rivaled anything French restaurants could offer. Yet, time, the essential ingredient for family cooking, was exactly what the modern world was stealing. 3. Chateaubriand. Sharing thick-cut beef tenderloin for two, Chateaubriand represented dining as ceremony. Meat so expensive it transformed meals into occasions worth remembering for decades. The thick tenderloin was roasted carefully to achieve perfect pink throughout, while sauces were prepared separately to complement rather than mask the meat's quality. Carving and serving became theatrical presentations that justified the expense. Chateaubriand embodied British families' peak dining ambitions when special occasions merited ingredients that cost more than most families now spend on weekly groceries. But the special occasions that justified such extravagance were becoming extinct like the dishes themselves. 2. Sweetbreads in cream sauce. For families willing to embrace organ meat, sweetbreads delivered delicate luxury, tender thymus glands in rich cream sauce that proved British palates could handle sophisticated offal when properly prepared. The sweetbreads required careful preparation, soaking, blanching, then sautéing until golden before finishing in cream sauce that masked any challenging flavours. The result was luxury that required courage alongside culinary skill. Sweetbreads represented British cooking's most adventurous phase, when families would tackle ingredients that challenged preconceptions in pursuit of authentic, sophisticated dining. At the peak of this vanished culinary courage stood one dish that embodied everything families were about to lose. 1. Quail with grapes. At the summit of British dining ambition stood quail with grapes, tiny birds that required individual attention, paired with fruit that transformed game into art for families who understood cooking as performance. Each quail needed careful roasting, while grapes were prepared separately, then combined in presentations that made single birds feel like feasts. The result was dining as theatre, where preparation time exceeded eating time by hours. Quail with grapes embodied everything British families lost after the 80s. Time for elaborate cooking, money for luxury ingredients, and belief that meals could be art rather than mere sustenance. These vanished meals didn't just disappear, they took with them an entire approach to dining, when British families believed that cooking sophistication was worth mastering, regardless of time or cost. Which of these lost 80s classics brings back the strongest memories? Share your stories in the comments below. Let's remember when British dining reached for the stars before settling for convenience. Don't forget to subscribe for more journeys through Britain's incredible culinary past.